It began in August 1977 when Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, lived with her 4 children in a small council house. Life was simple until strange things began to happen. One day, Peggy noticed that a wardrobe had moved. She dismissed it. A few days later, she heard knocking sounds within the walls. She again dismissed it, chalking it up to the age of the house. But then one day, as she was out shopping, her neighbors called her in a panic. Her children, it seemed, were throwing toys across the room. "I just thought they were having a bit of fun," says Peggy. "I didn't think anything of it." But what happened next was beyond explanation. She came home to find the kids gathered around the table. "What have you done?" she asked. The children looked back at her innocently. "We haven't done anything," they said. Then suddenly, right in front of Peggy, chairs slid across the floor. At first, she thought perhaps her son, who had recently started watching horror movies, had brought home a curse. But this was only the beginning. That night, Peggy awoke in her bed to a loud crash. In the kitchen, she found a plate on the floor and assumed the children had been playing. But when she went upstairs to check on them, she found their beds were overturned and the kids were nowhere to be seen. Then she heard the sound of crashing once again coming from downstairs. "I went running down the stairs and turned on the light," she recalled. "But everything was all right." Moments later, though, she heard a knock at the front door. She opened it, but no one was there. She checked the street. No one was outside. Confused, she closed the door. Suddenly, she felt a blow to her head. Turning around, she saw that the door had swung open again. She tried to close it, but it wouldn't budge. She ran from the room. Her neighbors, David and Winscott, were visiting friends nearby, but came running over when they heard her scream. By the time they arrived, the door was hanging off its hinges. Peggy told them what had happened. They listened patiently, exchanging nervous glances. "We thought she was crackers," David admitted. Who believes in ghosts, right? But soon, they too would see with their own eyes what was happening. One evening, they were sitting in their living room when suddenly a heavy chair moved through the air. It must have lifted about 2 feet in the air and went about 6 feet across the room, said David. And I'm not making this up. It's just what happened. Peggy, already suspicious that someone was playing a cruel joke, confronted her children. But they too were shocked and frightened. As it turned out, the chair had moved directly in front of them as well. The Scotts were stunned. They were rational people. Ghosts and poltergeists were nonsense. Yet what they had just seen could not be denied. In fact, the hauntings were now attracting the attention of the entire neighborhood. So much so that one day, a local policeman was dispatched to the scene. Her name was Detective Sergeant Elsie Fisher. She was tough and no-nonsense and not easily intimidated. But upon entering the house, she too experienced something unexplainable. As she walked up the stairs, she heard chains dragging metal moans. Then, from a bedroom, a rocking chair began to rock by itself. She watched in disbelief as it rose higher and higher. Peggy, her children, and the Scotts stood petrified as the rocking chair began to spin wildly around the room, banging into the walls. And that's when it happened. The chair shot across the room, lifting high in the air and landing directly on Elsie. But unbelievably, she emerged unscathed. To make matters even more shocking, she had suffered a serious knee injury just days before. Yet somehow the chair had lifted the full weight of her body and left her unharmed. "I don't believe in ghosts or any of that nonsense," she told reporters afterwards. "But I did see a heavy chair lift into the air and move several feet across the room. No one touched it." With skepticism evaporating fast, Elsie contacted her superiors. Soon, every available officer in the area was dispatched to the house. But nothing they did could stop the rampaging poltergeist. Windows shattered, objects flew through the air. Even the local vicar was sent reeling after he tried to bless the house and ended up with a black eye. As the ghost grew bolder, the press descended on the little street. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust forward. And amid the chaos, one question echoed above the rest. What was happening here? And who was behind it? Among those drawn to the mysterious happenings was 33-year-old Janet Hodgson, the second eldest of Peggy's children. But while the rest of the family trembled in fear, Janet was unfazed. In fact, she seemed downright delighted by all the attention. One reporter later wrote, "Janet is a natural-born actress. When anything happened, she made sure she was in the direct line of fire. Peggy insisted, however, that despite Janet's apparent enjoyment of the mayhem, the hauntings were terrifying for her. There was nobody there that wasn't frightened, she said. You can't imagine how we all felt! Then came the voice from the dark. It began softly, a whisper amidst the chaos, but soon it grew louder, taking on a distinct personality. Bill, I want my slippers! It boomed. Where are my slippers? Then to everyone's shock, the voice continued. I've got to get out. The front door is locked. The haunting took on a new urgency. Doors slammed, windows rattled. Then one day, Janet was thrown from her bed. She ran screaming into the hallway, collapsing at her mother's feet. I couldn't get out of bed, she cried. Something was pushing me. Peggy rushed to comfort her, but she knew that something strange was going on. Then came the news that chilled her to the bone. A local historian confirmed that yes, a man named Bill Wilkins had lived in the house and died there more than 50 years earlier. Still, many refused to believe what was happening. Skeptics claimed that Peggy and her children were making it all up, that they had somehow convinced the entire neighborhood of a haunting. That theory quickly fell apart. However, when other people in the area also began to experience unexplained phenomena, desperate for answers, Peggy called on paranormal investigators. Among them was the famous husband and wife team of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their reputation for solving mysteries of the supernatural had grown steadily in the 70s. But this case was unlike any they had ever seen. According to Lorraine, rooms would suddenly turn freezing cold and objects would fly through the air as if hurled by invisible hands. Most frightening of all, however, were the voices which seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We couldn't stop them, she recalled. They were relentless. But they weren't the only ones investigating. By now, dozens of journalists and paranormal enthusiasts had entered the house. Most emerged, shaken and speechless. One photographer later recounted the experience, saying, I walked through the house and felt something brush against my leg. I turned and saw nothing. Then a heavy bookcase covered it. It was amazing. There was no way that anybody could have done it. Amidst the chaos, rumors swirled. Some whispered that Peggy was making the whole thing up. Others claimed that demonic forces were at work. Still others pointed to the Warrens, accusing them of hyping the story for publicity. Yet despite the controversy, one thing was clear. Whatever was happening here was real. Hundreds of witnesses had experienced strange phenomena, including police officers, journalists, and well-known paranormal investigators. All of them were baffled. For 2 long years, the ghostly chaos continued. Then, just as inexplicably as it began, it stopped. The Hodgson family later moved away, never to speak publicly of the hauntings again. Rumors persisted, however, and even today, people debate whether the Enfield poltergeist was a hoax or a horrifying glimpse into another world. According to Janet, there was no hoax. While some stories may have been exaggerated, most of it was real. She insisted. If I'd known then what I know now, I would never have allowed those people to come into our house. Whatever the truth, the Enfield poltergeist remains one of the most famous and terrifying paranormal cases in modern history. Was it a hoax? Or proof of something far darker, an unseen force that invaded a family's home and refused to let go?